Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Fiona and I would just like to apologize for the bit of a delay. We did move from Santiago de Chile to this room thinking this might accommodate, but it seems like we'll work with the Secretariat to find a bigger room. We just wanted to make sure that all the groups are in the room. I think all the groups are in the room. For those that are intending to want to follow this, there is an overflow room as well, where you can watch the proceedings from there. But the Secretariat will try and find a bigger room for our next session. Unfortunately, New York is not available for us at this moment. Okay, colleagues, welcome parties and observers and observer organizations to the second meeting under the ad hoc work program on the new collective quantified goal on climate finance. I am Zair Fakir, and with me is my colleague, Fiona.
Good afternoon, everyone. Fiona Gilbert.
We are very pleased to see many of you here again, and thank you once again for the trust you have placed in us. To briefly recap our mandate, at CMA 5 in Dubai, parties decided the following for the ad hoc work program. That is to transition the mode of work to enable the development of a substantive framework for a draft negotiating text for consideration at CMA 6. It also decided to conduct at least 3 technical expert dialogues this year to allow for in-depth technical discussions on elements of the NCQG. These dialogues will be held back-to-back with at least 3 meetings under the ad hoc work program to enable parties to engage in developing a substantive framework for draft negotiating text that captures progress made, and allowing for iterative development thereof. In line with this, we, the co-chairs, will prepare an annual report on the work conducted under the work program, and including the annual report, the substantive framework for draft negotiating text. This will be issued no later than 4 weeks prior to CMA 6. You will also know that in addition to the ad hoc work program, the parties also decided to have a high-level ministerial dialogue that will be organized by the presidencies well before CMA 6, with a view to providing guidance to the deliberations on setting the NCQG.
Colleagues, at our first meeting in April in Cartagena, parties engaged constructively and shared their views on the draft structure of the substantive framework for a draft negotiating text and options for content to be included under the various elements of the structure, including the structural elements of the goal itself. Parties also provided their views on linkages between elements, options underneath each element, their possible placement, and how they saw the NCQG being implemented in the future. While there remain a range of views on the structure of the draft negotiating text and the elements of the goal, parties provided concrete proposals of how to frame such views. Further information on the outcomes of the first meeting is summarised in the information note on progress made at the first meeting under the ad hoc work program and way forward, which is available on the UNFCCC website. Since the first meeting under the ad hoc work program, we have undertaken a number of preparatory activities ahead of TED 10 and the second meeting of the ad hoc work program, including: we issued a notification on the 9th of May in which we shared questions to help parties and non-party stakeholders guide the preparation of submissions on their views on how to organise the 2 events. We thank all 13 parties and non-party stakeholders for outlining their views in their written submissions. Based on the submissions, the Secretariat made available a compilation and synthesis ahead of this dialogue, which can be accessed online. We also held informal bilateral consultations with interested parties and groups of parties upon their request, to hear their views on the outcomes of the first meeting and their expectations for the second meeting. Based on the submissions and the consultations that we held, we prepared and published the provisional program for the second meeting, which can be found on the UNFCCC website. Furthermore, as mandated, we prepared an information note on progress made at the first meeting. This note also includes an input paper for the second meeting, which, as requested by you, presents the views expressed during the first meeting and written inputs, as well as the options identified in the 2023 annual report by the co-chairs and earlier submissions made in 2022 and 2023. Finally, we convened the 10th Technical Expert Dialogue on Monday, which focused on facilitating a deepened shared understanding of views on ambition, qualitative elements, structure and transparency aspects of the NCQG, drawing on the elements and options discussed at the 9th Technical Expert Dialogue held in Colombia. We thank you all for your great interest and your active participation throughout the dialogue.
Moving to the organization of the second meeting, we emphasize at the outset that we are very encouraged by the constructive and positive engagements that we had in Cartagena at our first meeting. While we heard a wide range of views, we were encouraged by the respectful way in which people engaged, and we hope to continue in that fashion our discussions at this meeting, so in the same constructive and respectful way. Before opening the floor for reactions on the updated input paper, we would like to share our views on how we intend to organize this meeting, which, by our mandate, will be conducted in an open-ended, inclusive, and party-driven manner, open to observers and guided by the draft rules of procedures of the Conference of the Parties and its subsidiary bodies. In the spirit of openness and transparency, please be informed that this meeting is webcasted, and a recording of this meeting will be made available on the UNFCCC website. We are grateful to see the great interest by observer representatives to participate in this meeting. As this room may not accommodate all observers, we have allocated seats for constituencies and IGOs. You may also follow the meeting in the overflow room, which is in room Santiago de Chile. Furthermore, if time allows and party interventions have been exhausted, we would like to, with the permission of the parties, give the floor to observers who may wish to make an intervention at that point. Finally, on the format of the meeting schedule, you would have seen from the provisional program that we scheduled the meeting in 4 sessions throughout the 2 weeks. We encourage you to use the days in between to consult with your groups and with other groups to clarify views and positions and to reach an understanding.
Colleagues, as indicated prior to this meeting, we prepared an updated input paper. The input paper presents our best efforts to facilitate work here in Bonn, including the elements of the NCQG and views expressed on each element. It is not exhaustive and has no status. Rather, it serves as a tool to facilitate discussions at this meeting. And as you may recall, Zahir and I are mandated to allow for iterative development in preparing the substantive framework for a draft negotiating text. Therefore, to make best use of the time available to us and to make progress, we intend to update and improve the text to facilitate substantive discussions. We recognise that the document in front of you is long and difficult to navigate. Therefore, we would like to spend today's session hearing your views on how we can improve this document so that we can move forward towards our mandate of producing a substantive framework for a draft negotiating text. For example, we are after and seeking your guidance on how we should handle redundancies, repetitions, statements of facts, options that have evolved further, and other descriptive elements that speak more to the approach towards an element rather than the element itself, and to ensure consistency with the mandate and the relevant decisions related to the NCQG. When taking the floor, we kindly ask you to be targeted and avoid going paragraph by paragraph so that we can hear as many views as possible. We also acknowledge the submission received from one group of parties, AOSIS, overnight. And with that, I open the floor for interventions. And because, of course, this is a classroom style, we will do our best. So maybe if you can raise your flag up high when you're for the floor, the Secretary can note down the order of speakers. I recognise Argentina, followed by New Zealand.
Thank you very much, Co-Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here once again. Thank you again for giving me the floor, but especially for your hard work and the way you have conducted this process thus far, Co-Chair. It is an honor for me to make this opening statement on behalf of the G77 and China. I beg for your indulgence if I'm a little bit too extends in my intervention. Colleagues, friends, as was stated by our G77 chair, climate change is a pressing global challenge, particularly impacting developing countries and the most vulnerable populations. Recent extreme weather events highlight the urgent need for effective climate action. Our multilateral climate process must prioritize the needs of those affected, ensuring that the adequate and accessible resources are available to address climate impacts efficiently during this critical decade. Let me stress at the outset that for our group, this is a process under the Convention and its Paris Agreement. Regardless of any attempt to detach one another, the Paris Agreement was adopted under the Convention, and we are not here to discuss modifications to the content. This is not our mandate. The NCQG and its features must be in accordance with Article 9 of the Paris Agreement and the principles and provisions of the Convention. This means the goal must be delivered by developed countries to developing countries based on equity and the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. The purpose of the NCQG is to support the implementation of Article 2 in developing countries in accordance with Article 9. NCQG must be based on the priorities and needs of developing countries and support country-driven strategies with a focus on NDCs and NAPs as per the 2023 NCQG decision, and considering needs expressed in ACs and LTS along with other national plans. In this sense, the goal must include loss and damage response alongside mitigation and adaptation at a minimum to address developing countries' evolving needs as outlined in paragraph 26 of the decision I mentioned. And it should recognize the importance of just transitions to promote sustainable development and eradication of poverty for developing countries. Co-Chair, for our group, the NCQG must achieve the full operationalization of Article 9.4 and 9.9 of the Paris Agreement, including in relation to scale-up provision of financial resources, balancing adaptation and mitigation finance, delivering public and grant-based resources, especially for adaptation and loss and damage, concessionality, centrality of country-driven strategies, and the needs and priorities of developing countries, especially those that are particularly vulnerable to the adverse effect of climate change and have significant capacity constraints, in particular for seeds and LDCs. Another core element for our group co-chairs is the transparency arrangements that must be related to a definition in the sense that we need to agree on what to count and what not to count as climate finance. Loans at market rate and private finance at market rate of return cannot be termed as climate finance under the NCQG. Rather, they represent a reverse capital flow from developing to developed countries if we consider the repayment. Under the NCQG, we must agree on the following. Climate finance is about provision from developed to developing countries in concessional terms. It cannot include loans at the market rate, private finance at market rates of return, ODAs, and non-climate specific finance. It must not impose additional conditionalities to the provision and non-mobilization of climate finance to developing countries. On the contrary, the NCQG must provide access features that operationalize the requirements on access channels to ensure efficient and swift access to and enhance the coordination and delivery of climate finance for developing countries. Furthermore, the NCQG must be delivered via provision of public finance in a grant-based or concessional manner to address macroeconomic constraints of developing countries, including limited fiscal space, and the elements of the goal should take into consideration the need for support to be a net economic benefit for developing countries. It must also exclude any feature relating to domestic resources of developing countries. NCQG must provide a clear agreement on burden sharing amongst developed countries to establish the fair share of their collective obligation to provide climate finance, which allows predictability, transparency, and accountability. The NCQG must address these enablers of climate finance, such as high cost of capital, high transaction costs associated with access, unilateral measures such as CBAM, etc. The Convention and its agreements prescribe, as I said before, CBDRRC, and we have not agreed to change it, and for sure this is not the platform or the place to do it. Based on CBDRRC, countries with different levels of responsibility and different national circumstances can have differentiated regulatory and governance systems. Any attempt to equalize the regulatory regime jeopardizes the existing consensus of the UNFCCC regime. Any call for changes in the regulatory system, which are under the jurisdiction of sovereign governments, are uncalled for and should be avoided. We are here, to decide the NCQG, which reflects a mandate for the developed countries to deliver support for developing countries in line with Article 9, and we must stick to this mandate. Finally, and going into this meeting process, we thank you very much for the document we have before us. Although we deem 63 pages, it's maybe too much. Therefore, we are ready to give you a mandate to streamline it and make it more workable. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Argentina, on behalf of G77, and congratulations to you for your appointment as coordinator, and thank you for your statement and also for your mandate in allowing Zahir and I to streamline the text. Next, I have New Zealand, followed by Samoa.
Thank you very much, co-chairs. It's great to be back here with everyone in the room and yourselves after Cartagena. And we have a lot of work to do in front of us. It's also very nice to go after the group of 77 in China, and I'd like to acknowledge the appointment of the coordinator and also the framing that the G77 in China has just provided about the urgency of climate action and the role that the NCQG needs to play to do that. And for us, we see that as critical that this goal mobilizes, a large amount of finance from the widest range of sources possible to live up to that challenge. There are many other parts in the statement that we would agree with, the importance of access, for example, and of course there are other elements that we would disagree with. But this is the good thing about where we are here today. We have all those options presented in the text. And we would really like to be able to, in Bonn, here engage in the substance of these issues. But unfortunately, the input doc that we have right now is a bit too long and unwieldy to do that effectively. It's long, there's a lot of repetition, it's frankly a little hard to deal with. But you've also done exactly what we asked of you. And so we thank you for that, and it's the nature of the challenge that we have. So for us, it's very important that we use our time wisely here in Bonn. We have a lot of work to do, and so we would like to move promptly to suggestions of streamlining for the document, with the aim of getting a new iteration by the next session here in Bonn this week. So the streamlining we'd like to do is, of course, technical, not wanting to remove substantive options or priorities of any party, but work through the normal spirit of streamlining that we do in this process. You've offered us 3 questions or areas to look at. For us, we'd like to focus on B, on repetition, as we see that's where we can make the most strides most quickly in this process. For example, focusing on repetition, in the preamble context section, I think there's a lot that could be removed. For example, the section that joins them together, you could just have a placeholder and we have the content in the separate preamble and context sections. Transparency, there's a lot of common elements there, emphasizing the centrality of the ETF. Likewise, for 9.5 submissions, a lot of duplication there that can be removed. Similarly, on timeframes, the 5, 10, 25-year options, I think there's plenty of repetition that can be removed. Where there's some options that have repetition but small and important variations, we can also look to include them under an option with sub-bullets, for example, a 10-year time frame, and then have a bullet underneath it saying an option for continuing after 10 years. Little things like that can help us work through that duplication without losing any of the important nuances that do exist in the similar options. There's many others, and I don't want to go into them all here, but to give you an example of the kind of streamlining that we'd like you to do, we have confidence in you to take on that spirit, and I'm sure you'll hear many useful examples from others here today. So we've come here on the back of some really constructive spirit in Cartagena, and we want to keep it up. As challenging as it is, let us try and work diligently on this doc. Let's get a new iteration later this week for the next meeting. Thank you again for your work.
Thank you very much, New Zealand, and for your concrete suggestions on how you would like Zahir and I to update the input paper. Next, I have Samoa, followed by Norway, and then UK.
Thanks a lot, Madam Co-Chair. Firstly, we'd want to align ourselves with the group of 77 and China. And I will be speaking on behalf of the Alliance of Small Island States. As we normally start off, in the discussions, and we did in the first meeting, is about, the meeting and the mandate of the meeting, and we want to reiterate our position in the context of the meeting and understanding that the inputs, these things are under your authority as co-chairs, and we look forward to inputting into them and you reflecting those views, but understanding that this document is under both your responsibilities. And we were really pleased to see that, as you highlighted in the input paper, that it was non-exhaustive at this point, and had those status. And the reason why I want to highlight that is many may know, but the Alliance of Small Island States provided a submission to you, co-chairs, and thank you for responding to us, as well as uploading onto the different websites, where we hope it helps and it sort of speaks to the input documents that you all made, but provides a suggestion on how potentially it could be structured to make sure that the NCQG has the clear guidance that is needed that the 100 billion didn't have. And so we do hope that our submission in any updates can be included as a clear and articulated option in order for us to interact with the document in the best possible manner. And so then quickly on to the fact that of what to do going forward. We're at a stage in which that I think we need to ensure that the options that are in there are comprehensible, and we do understand that there are redundancies in the document, and we do see the value in obviously streamlining those redundancies. But at the end of the day, again, we recently just made a submission, and we do want to see, and we tried as best as possible to take the statements of fact that we had in our 2022 document and then articulate it into clear options in a sequential manner, in a structure that is similar to decision text, but leaving it open enough for it to be just elements and not decision text language. All that to say is that we're ready to engage with parties on our submission and to go forward from it. And we hope that it in the end is helpful and helpful to providing a more clear view from us as EOSIS. So that's all. Thanks a lot, Chair.
Thank you very much, Samoa, on behalf of AOSIS. Next, I have Norway, followed by the United Kingdom, followed by Cuba.
Thanks a lot, Co-Chair. And as always, appreciate the great work you're doing as Co-Chair, guiding us through this process. And as others have said, this document in its current form is difficult to work with, and we need to leave Bonn with a much better basis for further negotiations. We don't intend to take parties' substantive options off the table, but I think options can be further streamlined and narrowed down. I think we can present options and ideas in a much clearer way. I think that should be our ambition here. And as you also said, Co-Chair, the paper builds on views and written inputs from parties all the way back to 2022. And parties' views have evolved these 2 years. So we encourage you to take a critical look and remove positions and ideas that are old and where new ones have been formulated. Secondly, there are a number of subheadings in the text. We understand this as just a guide for the reader to organize the issues, and that is helpful, but not something that will remain in the text as it gets more developed. We encourage you to look at what is placed under the different subheadings, though, and whether there is a logical flow. There are many small variances, and issues are not always grouped together logically. Reordering them sometimes might be helpful. So, on language, there is a mix of different languages in the text. Some are decision texts, statements of facts, and concerns. It's a bit early to refine language into decision text. At the same time, it could be an idea to sort out elements that are more maybe conducive to be put in the preamble, the context section, and language and ideas that are more operational in the qualitative and quantitative parts. So have a look at that and what is more operational, and whether that is also something that could be moved into those parts of the paper which are more operational in form. of course, the structure and quantitative elements are quite long. And I think we need to work with it. This is, at the same time, I think, and we also had new ideas, a new submission from Samoa. Goal structure is the gist of this decision. And it seems a bit hard to do too much in this first iteration on elements related to goal structure and quantitative parts. I think this is the part where parties' positions are spelled out in more detail. So we need to preserve that, but then, of course, if there are obvious duplications, then we can look into that. On a comment just on mandate, it's hard to say what is outside or inside the mandate. I think in our view, it's abundantly clear that the mandate for these negotiations consider also how the goal contributes to the achievement of Article 2.1c and the contributor base of the goal. So a discussion at this stage about the mandate, we feel these are different views that parties have, and they should remain. And I think that's important that's our understanding. And I think that at this stage, that's where we are in negotiations. So to conclude, we look forward to a next iteration of the text that is focused on technical streamlining and helpful reordering of textual elements. And based on that, we look forward to more substantive discussions on the text in a new version of the input paper. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Norway. Next, I have the United Kingdom, followed by Cuba, followed by Egypt.
Thank you very much, co-chairs. As we start, it's important to put ourselves in the mindset to make progress over the next 2 weeks. We must keep this an open dialogue whilst maintaining faith in you, the co-chairs, to carry out your work and synthesize text towards CMA 6. The work you've done so far is really welcome. It's not been an easy job, and we really recognise that. But the text is very difficult to engage with as it stands. We've said before and continue seeing areas of potential convergence in previous negotiations and don't want this potential progress to be lost. We do see clear places where the text could be streamlined. And we think we should start by reducing duplication, demonstrating where positioning is closer together, but throughout it is also essential to ensure that everyone's ideas are still represented. And I would also echo New Zealand's call for a new iteration of this text in Bonn for us to engage with. We must maintain trust between us, and I would also echo the urgency raised by speakers before us, including the G77 in China and New Zealand. The UK considers there to be clear guiding stars which we cannot reach consensus without, and these are to agree a goal that aims at contributing towards the acceleration of the goals of the Paris Agreement and keeps 1.5 within reach, addresses the needs of developing countries, has clear and transparent processes to ensure accountability, and takes on the challenges in access to climate finance. In this spirit, we want to restate an old Chinese proverb on the immovable object and unstoppable force. We see Article 9 as an immovable object, whilst coming out with an outcome in Baku as an unstoppable force. And alongside with clarity on Article 9, we think it's important to keep our mandate in mind. So just building on Norway's points here, we began by speaking on this in TED as well, but we should all be able to agree that our mandate comes from 1 CP 21, paragraph 53, which states we are here in accordance with Article 9.3 of the Paris Agreement. Since the setting of the Paris Agreement, we have made a series of decisions which expand on that mandate at CMA 2, 3, 4 and 5. Co-chairs, we welcome the opportunity we have had over the previous days to understand the views of other parties, including through the TED earlier this week. We must keep this open dialogue and maintain trust in you to carry out your work and synthesize text towards the decision at CMA 6. Thank you.
Thank you very much, United Kingdom. Next, I have Cuba, followed by Egypt, followed by China. Cuba, you have the floor.
Do you hear me? Oh, yes. Thank you very much, Co-Chair, for giving me the floor. Cuba aligned itself with the statement made by the G77 and EOSIS, and later on by the like-minded group, and the general view shared by the developing countries represented here. We thank the Co-Chair for the input document presented, which will have to be streamlined on the basis of the discussion during these 3 days meeting on the draft work program. In terms of our expectation of the process, we would like to see a real commitment from developed countries to developing countries with an NCQG that guarantees efficient and rapid access to financial resources, taking into account those that are particularly vulnerable to the adverse effect of climate change and have significant capacity constraints, in particular SIDS and LDCs. The NCQG must be in accordance with the principles and provision of the Convention and its agreement, namely equity and CBDRRC and Article 9 of the Paris Agreement. This translates into the goal being delivered by developed countries to developing countries in line with the existing and evolving needs of developing countries. NCQG process is not the occasion to challenge or debate a fundamental interpretation of the Convention and the Paris Agreement. Attempts to shift the financial burden to developing countries that in no way are responsible for the climate crisis are unacceptable. The core of the NCQG should be on public resources that are grant-based and highly concessional, and it not must impose additional conditionalities to the provision or mobilization of climate finance to developing countries. Private sector will not venture into risk market and not to invest in adaptation and loss and damage. Private sector do not have obligation to provide the finance needed, even in the current financial architectural way of working, based on individual profit. Besides, in terms of transparency, how we hold accountable the private sector. Action show us that the narrative that there are not enough public funds does not hold waters when millions of dollars are dedicated to the wars. The money spent in armaments is in order of the trillions. The goal should prioritize predictability, transparency, and accountability in funding allocation. It also shall include climate finance definition, or, as a minimum, what is not to be counted as climate finance under the NCQG. Market rate loans, export credits, among others, should not be counted as climate finance. Climate finance is distinct from official development assistance. We want to see an NCQG that addresses these enablers of climate finance, such as the high cost of capital, high transactional costs associated with access, unilateral trade measure, and unilateral coercive measure. We also advocate for transparency arrangements that are in line with our principle and that respect the multilaterally agreed decision of the past few years with the enhanced transparency framework as the backward-looking reporting tool. This includes how finance is new and additional and represent a progression over time. We also believe in a goal aligned with the 5-year cycle of NDCs. Having said that, we are ready to engage in the debates on this important issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cuba. Next, I have Egypt, followed by China, and then the LDCs.
Thank you so much, Chair, and taking the floor on behalf of the African Group. The African Group fully supports a statement by Argentina on behalf of the G77 and other developing countries, including what was mentioned by Cuba now. Let me at the beginning also thank you, co-chairs and the Secretariat and our colleagues from Colombia for the hosting of the first meeting in Cartagena. It was a very good meeting. Hospitality and the spirit that we had there was very constructive. So we thank them for that, and thank you also for this, creating this enabling environment for a discussion. And we also welcome the document that you have with this different elements. It is long, but we are used to this in this process. Maybe some newcomers to the process are not used to having 65 pages with many options, but many of us here have had this experience before. So thank you so much for the document. I'll be working with you to streamline it and giving you the elements and the guidance on the streamlining and the main elements that we would like to see. But it is not a new thing that we have such documents in this process. Co-chairs, it is important when you streamline the document. I think we have to follow very specific elements there. The first one, that as long as we are sitting in this room and working on those documents, we have to be in full conformity with the Paris Agreement. We are working under the Paris Agreement. It is the legal basis, and it is the legally binding document that provides us with the guidance on everything. Ideas of old or approaches that removing old ideas and so on is something that we find problematic because, I mean, I don't know how old would be the ideas. Is it 5 years, 10 years, 30 years, 40 years? So it is something challenging. And we, all of us have come into this process working within a legal framework that we have all ratified. So it is the Paris Agreement that provides the guidance for dealing with the elements that are there. The second element is that we have also to be reflective, and your streamlining has to reflect the agreements that were reached by the parties in the different elements of the NCQG. Especially the ones that we had in the UAE, that was very clear that the NCQG should be reflective of the evolving needs of developing countries, and it should be supporting the implementation of the current NDCs and the NAPs. And I don't think this was old enough to be forgotten, but I think this is a very crucial element of the NCQG. The third element is that it has to be implementable, transparent, and serves the purpose. And the purpose is, as was mentioned by colleagues, to deliver on the Paris Agreement. So a Paris Agreement, again, comes to the discussion here. Implementable means that we need to learn lessons from what we had in the 100 billion. And finally, it has to be clear on the MRV system or MRV mechanism that it will include to enhance the transparency. So with that in mind, the expectation of the African group is as follows of a document that will be coming forward for further discussion. First, a quantum, so we have to have a clear figure, and this clear figure should be reflective of the needs of developing countries to deliver on NDCs and also to ensure that the 1.5 is within reach. Time frames that is in conformity with the time frames that we have established in this process. We're still working within the Paris Agreement process, and the time frames there, it is between the NDCs 10 years and the GST 5 years. So there is a process that has to be in conformity, and we are not creating something new in terms of processes. And it has to deal with the drawbacks of the 100 billion, especially when it comes to the instruments. So it is concessional instruments. We have to be on the qualitative part very clear that issues that we have seen in 100 billion, including the latest reports that highlighted that loans, commercial loans, were counted as climate finance. We should be avoiding that. We have to be very clear on what we say on climate finance, including, of course, if possible and as possible, we can reach a clearer definition there. Together with a clear idea of burden sharing between developed countries, because this will allow the transparency. One of the main lessons that we have in the 100 billion, that non-delivery of some on their share of the 100 billion has caused challenges for others. And then another element, it has to be reflective of the equitable distribution between the regions while acknowledging the special circumstances of those who are facing it. Including, of course, SIDS, LDCs, and those are facing the fiscal space and the development challenges like Africa and others. On the transparency using the ETFs or otherwise, I think for now, and as we mentioned before, it is we can work around that, but this will depend again on what we agree on in terms of the elements that I mentioned before. So if we are shifting away from Article 9, then we will need a totally new system, like what we had in other places for ensuring transparency and working on the MRV. If you are working within Article 9, particular 9.1 and 9.3, 9.5, 9.7, 9.9, 9.4, those elements will allow us to be within the ETFs. If we shift away from that and talk about other stuff like flows and private sector, then we'll have a new system there to ensure the transparency and the delivery of this goal. Again, I cannot emphasize enough that we are working within a legally binding process, legally binding document that has identified responsibilities, that has identified who contributes, who benefits, and that has put it very clearly and was ratified by our constituencies back home, parliaments and others. So if we shift away from this, then we are going in a direction of creating something new, and this something new will have a very limited bearing, both on the delivery and also on the incoming NDCs. I would say that. I'll stop there, and I wish you all the luck in this refining this document. And as I said, I mean, like, we have full confidence in you. You have done a good work, and having long documents is nothing new to this process. So we'll be working together with you moving forward things. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Egypt, on behalf of AGN. Before I go to China, I know that you can't see each other because it's a classroom setup, and also the screen doesn't show the faces of the speakers. There's something wrong with the camera in this room. We're really sorry about that. My understanding is that it is webcast and the people in the overflow room can see your faces. So apologies for that. I have China, followed by LDCs, and then Saudi Arabia.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Firstly, I want to express my gratitude to our Co-Chair for their continued efforts and constructive approach. Your comprehensive capture of views in the 63 pages of updated input paper is appreciated, but it's too long. And also China fully support the statement made by Argentina on behalf of G77 China. From the input paper, we concern about the element that contradict the UNFCCC and Paris Agreement being legitimate. And as the first financial goal under the Convention and its Paris Agreement, we should streamline our approach by removing redundant and elements that conflict with the UNFCCC and Paris Agreement, and clarifying ambiguous points with clear proposals. And also regarding on the mandate, I always come back with the mandate. As I said many times, for the first paragraph of the mandate is not exact the same word with the paragraph 1 CB1 1 CB21 paragraph 53. We want the exact same language. Of course, I have many issues within the document, but the first paragraph should be right, at least, right? We want the language from the mandate. So to be summarized, we need a structure for insecurity that is ambiguous, ambitious, transparent, and fair, align with the principle of the UNFCCC and its Paris Agreement. We urge developed countries to show greater ambitions and commitment in supporting developing countries. I'm looking forward to continue collaboration and positive outcome from this dialogue. And I thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, China, and you were the lucky charm that fixed the camera. Next, I have LDCs, followed by Saudi Arabia and then Australia.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. And we would want to start by aligning our comments with the statement delivered by our G77 coordinator. On the input paper, the LDCs, we believe that it is presently difficult to engage with the document right now. So we think there is space for streamlining the text, because there are many paragraphs that are expressing redundancies and duplications, which could be merged or some removed. We also have observed that there are different types of inputs that are mixed between each section. So to facilitate reading and further streamlining, elements of similar nature, such as statements, overarching views, and expectations could be grouped together. Other types of inputs are more concrete and closer to the style of decision text, but still they require more precision. So for example, para 14, recalling mandating decisions, and 16, recalling elements from the mandate, these types of inputs could also be refined or grouped together. Similarly, the section on structure and quantitative elements or quantified elements could be grouped, as these sections are meant to provide overarching framework with quantified targets that needs to be linked. So that said, we would request you co-chairs to do some streamlining in advance of our next meeting on Saturday, and we then assess the next steps. However, as LDCs, we would want to reserve the right to come back if any of our elements are missing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, LDCs. Next, I have Saudi Arabia, followed by Australia, followed by the United States.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Saudi Arabia, speaking on behalf of the Arab Group, would like to first thank the co-chairs of the Ad Hoc Work Program for their iterative work and efforts in driving the process forward on setting the NCQG. We also would like to thank the co-chairs for having an open door policy consulting with parties and groups of parties. It's been tremendously helpful to hear from you. Although, of course, we highly appreciate the work, and perhaps I'm newer to the process, so 63 pages does seem quite lengthy for me. We are concerned that the input paper also lacks structure at the moment. It makes it difficult to engage, and we're very eager to engage in a discussion to progress our work. And we're confident in the co-chairs and their ability to streamline. However, would like to also provide some guidelines and overarching principles, as well as some categorization that could take place. We'd like to put forward 3 principles. The first one is, in principle, to remove redundancy, remove elements that are outside of the scope and mandate. And for us, this relates to discussions on the contributor base, recipient base, Article 2.1c. We view those as being outside of the scope and the mandate. And we also would like to remove elements that are misaligned with the principles and provisions of the UNFCCC and its Paris Agreement. Similar to what was stated by other groups and as alluded to in the statement by Argentina on behalf of the G77 on the importance of not trying to change the Paris Agreement. And based on these principles, we actually conducted a review of the input paper with a view to providing some guidance on the streamlining to the co-chairs. And we recommend 5 categories to split the elements into, or paragraphs. The first category would be to retain elements that are core to the mandate, and these are the quantum, the time frame, access features, etc. And second category would be a separation of elements that require further clarification, further detailing. So, for example, there are a lot of proposals put forward that don't have any clear indication of what the quantum would be, what the time frame would be, what the review process would be. It's just general. Perhaps it requires more clarity. And then C or 3, we also propose a category that removes elements or sets aside elements that are outside of the mandate and misaligned with the principles and provisions of the Convention and its Paris Agreement. The fifth category, of course, is, as mentioned in the overarching principles, to remove elements that are redundant or no longer relevant. And here we have very clear definition for that. This includes requests for future TEDs that already happened, for example, which is included in the input paper. It includes context-specific statements that are relevant to a meeting that element was said in, that's in response to something else. And finally, in the last category, we'd like to remove elements that represent guidance on how we should set the NCQG or what the NCQG should be. I think we're reaching a stage now where we should actually set the NCQG rather than discuss how it should be set and what it should reflect. I think we should just go ahead and attempt to find a way to set it. And so just We know it's a difficult undertaking and the input paper is long, so our group put together actually a table of these categories and elements that we view fit in these categories, and we'll be making a submission this evening to you to help you with the streamlining and to, on what we view, which element in which paragraph falls in which category, so we'll share that with you after this session. We believe, like others, we want to give you the mandate to come with a second iteration before the next time we meet. But we do want to present our views on this process. Once we have the second iteration, our view is there are a lot of elements that even retained require an improvement in quality and detail. And I'll give an illustrative example, then hand over the floor. So for example, we provided in our submission for several years now that the quantum would be $1.1 trillion per year from developed to developing countries, not including the arrears of the 100 billion. And this number was determined from the first NDR, and we're open to updating it based on the numbers from the second NDR. Since then, we further explored and detailed our position on this, and we've actually have a clear, more detailed proposal for it. We realized, for example, that in 2022, the government expenditures of Annex II countries reached 13 trillion. We realized that 3.4% of that would be $441 billion. That represents only 0.8% of GDP in Annex II countries. And we realized that if each dollar mobilizes $1.5, then that would deliver the $1.1 trillion to cover the cost of NDCs, the 30% of those that were costed. So we realized that less than 1% is what actually developing countries are asking for in terms of provision that will mobilize $1.1 trillion per year. So that's the form of quality improvement that we're looking at. We also realized that there could be some guidance to Annex II countries on where revenues can be generated from in order to provide this $441 billion. We realized, for example, that military emissions represent 5% of historical emissions. And one, for example, potential idea is to have a tax on defense companies in developed countries. This is something that could be put forward. We also realized that a financial transaction tax can actually generate a lot of revenues as well. And so this type of quality improvement and in the text to more concrete proposals is what we'll be engaging in the next session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Saudi Arabia, on behalf of the Arab group. Next, I have Australia, followed by the United States, followed by Canada.
Thank you, co-chairs. I note that I'd like to add my voice to those who've expressed an ambition to move the dial on progress whilst we're here in Bonn. And I'd like to thank you, co-chairs, as well as the SBI chairs, for making space for iterative meetings. I think it's very helpful, particularly in the context of our mandate to develop in an iterative manner drafts towards the substantive framework for a draft negotiating text. I hope over the course of the meetings we'll be able to work together to make some real progress. But that does take me to the input paper, and wow, it's long. I don't know if you've broken any records with 654 paragraphs. I don't know if the Secretariat's run the numbers on that, but congratulations. It is, however, the product we asked you to develop, so thank you. But I absolutely agree with others who've asked you to produce a further iteration which does streamline the document, because I think in the current state that it's in, it will be difficult for us to advance substantive discussions. And so I have prepared some thoughts as to how we would like to see that streamlined. From our perspective, it should be a technical and editorial task in this first stage, because parties yet haven't had a chance to undertake substantive discussions on the content within the paper. So that should be with the ambition to improve upon the document just to make it more readable and to reduce unnecessary duplication without losing any substance or nuance. So I'd suggest we do that under the basis of 3 key principles. The first being the reduction of duplication whilst maintaining substance. So in this sense, they should not remove options which represent views currently held by parties if they are not otherwise included in the document. The second is removing content which represents old views, which has clearly been surpassed by more evolved options presented. And of course, defer to co-chairs in your judgment of those. I've heard concerns raised by others that don't want to see older content removed, but we trust you'd be able to help us with that task in a manner that's sensible. In particular, for example, you could look to the content which has been lifted directly from the co-chair's annual report. Some of the options we see represented in there do represent older versions of options which are now fleshed out in more detail in the document. We think those could be potentially removed. And the third principle is the editorial reordering or adjustment to ensure elements are captured under the right sort of headings or sections and in the flow of the sections themselves to see a reordering for a natural flow of issues. So you could see that being a sweep just to ensure all the content is indeed included under the right headings, zones or groupings. I think New Zealand made a good point about opportunities to streamline groupings, including, for example, the duplication of the preamble and context section when there's already a preamble section and a separate context section. And then, of course, the flow of the sections themselves. So, for example, under 2.1, the paragraphs which contain elements relevant to references to the Paris Agreement and the Convention, you could probably order those so all of the references to the Paris Agreement are grouped together, and all the references to the Convention are grouped together. Currently, they're interdispersed, and it does make it difficult to read through. And if they were to be grouped together, it would also be easier to see where there's duplication. I would like to reflect quickly on what we don't think streamlining is. I've heard some suggestions here that I'm not quite comfortable yet with us pursuing. We see streamlining as a technical task. It's not one which should remove substantive options, and so I disagree with approaches which some have suggested on cherry-picking areas for removal of some elements without due justification, especially when we know they're important for many parties. I'd like us to move forward on the basis of trust and good spirit, and in that sense, my sense is we shouldn't be removing anything of great substance yet. We also mandated to discuss many of these elements, and I know we do have disagreement over some interpretive elements of these mandates, but the mandate itself is very clear. And in that sense, I support the statements already made by the UK with respect to the mandates that bring us here today. I also respectfully disagree with my colleague from Saudi Arabia who spoke before me, and I do see consideration on both the contributor base and Article 2.1c as being within scope of that mandate. I also would like to note we're not yet comfortable with co-facilitators making judgment calls on what is and what is not aligned with mandates. We think these are matters which are more appropriate for parties to discuss, and we look forward to engaging in those discussions whilst we're here in Bonn. I also would not be supportive of removing any elements which speak to the how, which I know was a suggestion just raised. I think those are really important to keep included. We were asked in our mandate last year to think about the interlinkages between components. I think many of the options which are presented in the input paper which speak to how sort of go to those interlinkages and are an important part of our discussions as we move ahead. So with respect to our sort of vision for the next product, I think we would like to see something with improved readability that would enable us to move forward and have more substantive discussions at our next meeting, including a paper that will enable us to really talk through the options in the paper and their actual substance. Also to discuss the interlinkages and interrelationships between elements and how they come together. Noting that at this stage it's hard to see them as comprehensive packages because they are interdispersed throughout the paper. But I think it's important that we maintain the current structure of the paper as it is, because it's something that parties are familiar with and comfortable with. And also because we know we don't have much time, a significant restructure of the current structure of the paper is not something we would advise. I note many of the additional options have been raised today. I think many of the options raised by Egypt on behalf of the AGN are actually already included in the input paper. However, we're comfortable to see any additional options that were raised, of course, added in. But I do take the point made by Samoa on behalf of AOSIS on their desire to keep their submission together as one option, because the elements contained within their option are interlinked. But I do struggle to see how that would be integrated as one option into the current paper, because the paper is structured around different elements of the goal. But I trust that co-chairs will be able to find a way forward on that makes sense. And then ideally, I think I would like to see us moving towards a transformed product at the end of the SB sort of set of meetings that we have, which does allow us to think of these as more as packages and to speak to the interlinkages between those elements. I think ideally by the end of the session we'll also move away from statements expectations that don't actually contain substantive options, but I'm not comfortable yet taking those off the table because some of those expectations do have nuanced substance within them, which I think parties need to discuss. And then I'd like to finish on a fun note, just to note that we will have many sessions together over the coming days. And on the 8th, on Saturday, we will have another meeting. It is also going to be a day where many of us will be wearing pink. And I would like to, on the 8th, encourage all of my fellow negotiators to wear pink to the session. It's an important signal of the importance of gender equality, particularly in the context of advancing climate action, which is our common purpose here. It's also a way for us to stand together and send a powerful message as colleagues on the important role that women play in the UNFCCC process and our commitment to advancing together towards enhanced inclusion, equality and empowerment. So I hope to see you all in pink on Saturday. I'll be wearing pink. I have extra items. If anyone needs anything from my wardrobe, I'm most happy to lend them. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Australia. So if you don't have anything pink in your suitcase, you have a few days to go and get something or borrow from Brit's wardrobe. Next, I have the United States, followed by Canada, and then ILAC. So United States.
Yes, thanks very much, co-chairs. And I'd like to start off at the outset here thanking all of you for the extraordinary amount of work that's clearly been done and gone into this document. It's an enormous task to synthesize now 2.5 years of information and put it together in a comprehensible format. And I think we are beginning to move in the right direction on this. I'd like to start off talking a little bit about the mandate for this activity as I think we see it from the US's perspective. As I understand this, our task here is to design the financial architecture to discuss how we are going to invest in climate action under the Paris Agreement. This is not a small task, and I appreciate the seriousness with which everybody has come to this room to discuss this effort. It is clear that in this critical decade, the investments required in order to achieve our shared goals are well into the trillions of dollars, and we need to be serious and ambitious about how we take steps to respond to those needs, globally, taking into account all sources, international, domestic, public, and private. There is no path toward the type of future that we're trying to build to a 1.5 degree future, to a climate resilient future, if we do not have that broad vision and really think creatively here about how we go beyond what we did in the 100 billion regime, which everyone in this room knows did not work and did not serve to meet the needs of developing countries or respond to the ambition that is set out for all of us in the Paris Agreement. It's also clear to us that we need to draw on the widest possible sources of finance, including an expansive base of contributors where we are talking about support. The world has changed dramatically since not only the annexes which were established under the convention, but also since 2009, when the 100 billion goal was adopted voluntarily by a group of parties who wanted to show their commitment to supporting others. It's time to have that conversation again, and we are looking forward to discussing this with parties moving forward here. On that note, I'd like to talk a little bit about specifically how we see this activity moving forward. As others have said, we see a goal that is multi-layered. We've made many proposals on qualitative elements, and I think that it's important that we continue to discuss and include all elements in our paper here that respond to the mandate that we were all given. And I agree with many of the comments that have been made that we have to respect the mandate that this process was given. And in our view, that mandate is clear. Decision 14 CMA1 very clearly states that this goal is relevant to Article 2.1c. That's a line that is repeated as we establish the ad hoc work program in Glasgow. And we also are very clear that this effort and our discussions here should include efforts on sources, for example, under which we understand work on contributor base falling. So as we think about structuring the document in the way forward, I would be very happy to see elements on contributor base included in that conversation on sources, but we would not be okay seeing those things removed. I agree with what others have said that this document, while impressive, is challenging to read and to get through. Frankly, I think we've had a bit of a hard time identifying all of the various proposals that the US has made over the course of the last several years in here. One that I see for sure is missing in the quantitative section is from a floor of 100 billion to reflect the fact that we have been given a mandate in this process to think about how we scale up and move beyond from a floor of 100 billion as we set the quantum for this new goal. That's something that I think we see as being included here certainly, and would like to see that included. I agree with others that as a next step, it makes a lot of sense to talk about streamlining and figuring out how we go from this large compilation text to something that's a little bit more comprehensible and something that we can work with. As we undertake that exercise, I agree that the best way to do that is to continue with the key structure and approach that's already been decided by co-chairs, and I think we've engaged well with this so far as a group, including at the meetings in Cartagena. And the things that we would suggest doing are, as others have said, removing redundancy, removing statements, and beginning to move our action here in this process towards elements and concrete proposals where we have some sufficient specificity to begin to actually work with and discuss. In that context, I think we also recognize that there are many proposals where there are tiny nuances between elements that might be similar. And I think in those cases, we would want to see those retained in order to reflect those nuances. And for us, I think this includes on the hows and sort of the explanations of those proposals of how the quantum would be increased or how the transparency arrangements would work, for example. We'd love to see a little bit of focus as well on the ordering of proposals and groupings. We quite liked the use of curly brackets as an indicative guide to readers to help get a sense of how elements were similar. But a little bit more focus here, I think, could really help us understand which elements are speaking to the same issues. I'd also like to personally see that used a little bit more conceptually. So in time frame, for example, we've been talking about the difference between a time frame for a ramp-up period of the goal and a time frame for how long the goal will run. I think that's a helpful distinction to include in here, which I'm not currently seeing, and I'm sure there are other examples of places where introducing some sub-concepts here to help us get clarity about how we're addressing certain elements would be useful. And last but not least, on this point about the insertion of submissions as a whole here, I certainly understand that, and I think that's something that we as the US had also thought about as we had made some propositions on this in Cartagena. I would suggest that maybe the best way to handle this is to try to keep maybe the outlines of those things in the structural section, because I recognize there are really key linkages between aspects of the structure, and there are big proposals on structure in here, but to also mainstream the other more specific aspects alongside their counterparts elsewhere in the document to make sure that they can be appropriately compared to their counterparts. After all, this is sort of a contest of ideas, and I'd like to really see, in particular, those AOSIS proposals alongside others to see if and when their ideas are better, how we can take them on board and incorporate them here. I think that's all from our side for now, but all to say we really appreciate the work that you all are doing and looking forward to diving in more on the substance of this effort as we move forward in this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, United States. Next, I have Canada, followed by ILAC, and then the Philippines. Canada.
Thank you so much. I wanted to start first by thanking both of the co-chairs for your work putting together this really long and detailed document, and also to the Secretariat, as I know the Secretariat would have played a really big role as well. This document you would have had to pull from so many different sources, so many different meetings, so many different submissions, and so I imagine the time it would have taken, and I'm really grateful, even though it is very long. What I'm hearing and it's nice to go towards the end of the session, I'm hearing a lot of consensus on the way forward, which is to streamline the text. We agree with others who have observed that the text is rather unwieldy and difficult to work with. To be honest, because of the length and all of the various information contained, it was quite difficult for me to even capture and understand all of the nuances. So I think that a streamlined version is the way forward for now. We have 4 more sessions and a few days until our next session, and so I think that that's a really constructive next step. But it sounds like where we are agreeing on the need to streamline, there may be some differences in what that means to everybody in the room or to different groups. So just to be clear on what Canada means in this situation, the aim should really be readability and clarity so that we can digest all of the elements that are in the text. And that was what I had a hard time with over the last week or so, trying to read through the document. So a few have mentioned, but it's really more of a technical streamlining. It would be to remove repetition, but to keep the nuance. So where texts are rather identical, I think those could be deleted, but where there's a slight difference, I think it's useful to keep the text. And a few others have said this, but a way to manage that duplication would be within the ordering of the clusters. And so when I was looking at, for example, the convention references and the Paris Agreement references, to me it sort of seemed like a bit of a scale. Like there's you could have a lot of convention references all the way to no convention reference, and ordering that within there. That would help when we look at the text to see what's really in it. I've also heard from some groups that they want some more substantive streamlining, and we just aren't there yet in the process. We're not willing to skip over the next 6 months of negotiating to put a quantum on the table by Saturday, or to take the idea of having a contributor base off the table. There are certain very firm positions that we have that just can't be taken out of the text. On the mandate, the mandate is the best way to achieve Article 2. And I think it's up to us in this negotiating process to determine how best to do that. And it's not a clear black and white list. And therefore, I think it would be impossible for you at this stage to make a determination or a judgment call on what should be included. If it were a black and white list, I think it would be clear that to everyone that Article 2.1c should or should not be there, and it's clear that we still have divergent views on that. And in particular, where issues are interlinked. So the interlinkages, for example, on the quantum are that a quantum will differ just by plain math based on the number of contributors and who they are, if it's the public finance that they commit alone, or if it's also investment flows. So we therefore need to keep all of the elements for now. And I think, I'm not sure if I understood well, but I think the LDC group suggested to group text by types of input, so ideas and versus decision text. I wouldn't suggest doing that at this stage because, again, it would be a judgment call. I think for me, when I read it, I didn't struggle with what was an idea or a decision text. I struggled more with, I want to understand sort of where the spectrum of ideas are. And then the last thing that I would say is just that we Canada really want a constructive session on Saturday. And so to me, that means maintaining all of the substantive elements that are in the text, even if they're elements that I don't particularly agree with, like references to the convention or limiting the quantum to only public finance from the former Annex 2 contributors. There are things that I think are important to others, and so to sort of maintain that respectful harmony, I think we just need to make sure that the edits that you make really are focusing on the readability and capturing sort of the essence without taking away the substance. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Canada. And can I just remind everyone that we have about 13 speakers left on the list and less than half an hour to go. So can I encourage all remaining speakers to be as brief as you can and to give us the guidance on how you would like to take this work forward. So next I have ILAC, followed by the Philippines, followed by Nepal. ILAC, over to you.
Thank you very much, co-chairs. We will try to be as brief as possible, taking into account time constraints and to allow others to also be able to express their ideas. So I will be speaking on behalf of ILAC, and let us first align ourselves with the G77 and China statement. Dear colleagues, the work that we undertake now during the sessions of the second ad hoc work program meeting, building on all the progress that we made in Cartagena and that we were privileged and honored to have you there, will pave the way for achieving a significant and ambitious results at COP29. So let's also remind the importance of the NCQG and the task at hand for this year's COP, which will definitely be the COP, the finance COP, the climate finance COP. What we have been hearing from some of our colleagues, so first is just like we are ready to engage constructively so that we can move and achieve progress by Saturday. We know how limited time we are, the task at hand, and we really want to move forward in this process. Though we are concerned with some of the comments that we have been hearing on the floor, I don't know if this is maybe a misinterpretation, but what we're hearing is that certain developed countries would like the NCQG to be for their own, like, for their own financial resources, apparently, for their own climate action. This would be a little bit, this is very concerning. For us, the NCQG is there for developing countries. It is in its spirit and it is in their mandate. So we're in a critical decade and the credibility of our regime is at stake. And the establishment of the NCQG will chart the course of coming decades. And the fulfillment of the Paris Agreement will not be possible without developing countries. And the NCQG is there for supporting developing countries. We're being faced with different constraints that are making it very, very, very hard for us to attract the different sources of finance. We have very high cost of capital. We have debt sustainability issues, very also cost of servicing debt. We have high transaction costs, limited fiscal space, and it could continue to go on. So it is very important that we have a clarity that the NCQG is for developing countries in its entirety. It is crucial that we continue to work together to ensure that the NCQG is fit for purpose and it takes a response to the evolving needs and priorities of developing countries in at least mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage in a way that supports supports current and future levels of ambition of developing countries, and as I was saying before, does not pose a threat to development. And we want here to have like low emissions and climate resilient development. So taking into account without compromising our fiscal or debt sustainability. So in that sense, we would like to reemphasize and that we are echoing the concern of others have raised on the floor with the inclusion of elements that are outside the mandate and the legal framework of the NCQG. So this is something that we would like to emphasize here. Now, talking on the text, thank you very much, co-chairs and secretariat, for that work. We see that you have compiled all the proposals, ideas of different parties, and we see how you have done this comprehensively, and we see represented all our views. So thank you very much. We understand the magnitude of the work ahead. So in that sense, we also feel as others that these text is very difficult to engage with. It's extremely long. There are a lot of repetitions, duplications, as we have been mentioning, and we have to know how to treat that. I agree with what was previously mentioned, and there are different types in which we are providing text also that it's being there. So seeing how very limited time and in the sake of progress and that we really want to move and have a substantial progress and be able to engage on the content, we would like to mandate co-chairs for streamlining, in particular to eliminate redundancies and duplications, so that on Saturday in the next session we can start seeing on the content. We can start talking and discussing about the content. We would agree with all those that have said that it is important to maintain the nuances of the different elements and proposals because they also have and represent parties' perspectives. We agree also that with this. Oh, I forgot right now the word in English, but in the way that this, not the subtitles, but that the other elements were presented, in which they were categorized throughout the text. although they try to give a little bit of idea for us on what we're talking about, it can be confusing, and we don't understand sometimes why some paragraphs are under certain and not under others, especially when they touch upon different topics at the same time. And sometimes we see that there was like kind of a decision on where to put it. So maybe we would rather go with the structure that we would working in Cartagena without like those because they already imply a judgment or where they should be going. So this may be a little bit complex also to navigate. Maybe as a proposal, if we continue to go like following the Cartagena kind of rationale and logic, to have the same like elements that we provided. We heard at the time that some parties also wanted to introduce access. We feel so comfortable with having that separated, if that's what some certain parties want. But maybe on the quantitative and the qualitative elements, so that we follow also like that the quantitative have all the elements that are related to them. You know, like kind of like the qualifiers of the quantitative part, so that we can follow the logic on the quantitative side. And then, well, regarding the next update, it is important, and as we have been saying before, that the text really reflects all the options that's being put on the table, although we would like to reemphasize that we are concerned about certain elements that fall outside of the mandate of the NCQG. And then just to encourage everyone to keep working in a very constructive spirit. We are here to make progress. That's what we want. We want to have a very robust text for COP 29. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, ILAC. The list has grown. And we have 20 minutes left. My co-chair and I would really like to get through the speakers list so that we can have a clear way forward and make best use of the next few days before Saturday. So if I can encourage all the remaining speakers to be as brief as possible. Next, I have the Philippines, followed by Nepal, and followed by Group So.
Thank you, co-chairs and colleagues. At the outset, the Philippines thanks the co-chairs and the Secretariat for facilitating this meeting under the ad hoc work program and expresses gratitude for the preparation of an input paper. The Philippines aligns with G77 on the need to streamline the input paper to ensure that the NCQG provides clear guidance to developed parties in the delivery of financial support to developing nations. Financing is the cornerstone of having effective climate action that goes above and beyond the promise of the Paris Agreement. This is precisely why our determination of an NCQG on climate finance through this draft text must make great progress to enable it to stir transformational responses to climate change as was intended. The NCQG has always been meant for developing countries, and it is our needs that must direct and reflect its scale, scope, and ambition. Yet having an ambitious target for the quantum does not rest on sheer scale alone, but also in its quality. Climate financing must consist on the right means in order to effectively translate into material climate action. It is our strong view that the following should be considered in the course of drafting the draft negotiating text. The preamble should clearly set the foundations of the NCQG in accordance with Article 9 of the Paris Agreement, Articles 4 and 11 of the Convention, and the principle of CBDRRC, climate justice and equity. The urgency of action entailed in determining the new goal must be embedded on clear science and evidence basis, as encapsulated in the UNEP adaptation and mitigation gap reports. Public finance must be emphasized as the means to mobilize climate finance and ensure the provision of grant-based and highly concessional financing. Scaled-up mobilization of financial resources must correspond with the evolving needs and priorities of developing country parties, with reference to the first report on the determination of needs by the Standing Committee on Finance. More importantly, the NCQG must address disenablers of climate finance, particularly the cost of capital, high transaction of access, and unilateral measures. Certainly, this process serves as an opportunity for us to pave the way to set greater ambitions leading to expansive and transformative actions. The Philippines trusts that the crucial stage of our discussions will provide decisive options in shaping the new goal. Rest assured that the Philippines remains committed to working with parties in coming up with a streamlined draft negotiating text, capturing key recommendations for NCQG. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Philippines. Next, I have Nepal, followed by Group Sir, followed by Brazil.
Thank you very much, co-chairs, and namaste to all. First of all, we would like to associate ourselves with this statement made by G77 and China and the LDC group. Also, thank you, co-chairs and the Secretariat for the input paper. Well, in one of our consultations, we very clearly told you that don't give us 60, 70 pages of document. Now you do. We'll have to give it back to you. Well, I mean, so that you can shorten it to make it a more workable format, probably by the next setting. Of course, removing redundancies, duplications, and also move some of the inputs that fit under the right elements or headings. But while you do this, it must be in line with the Article 9 of the Paris Agreement and the principles and the provision of the Convention. It must truly reflect the needs and priorities of developing countries. When you say this, it must help implement NDCs, LTS, and NAPs, because this is the key enabler to get to 1.5 degrees. Quantum is very key, and of course, this will reflect the needs and priorities, but we would be more interested in the public finance from the floor of $100 billion. We need very clear sub-goals, of course, adaptation and mitigation, also to avoid the imbalance, but we'd also like to see loss and damage clearly stated there, as it should capture the evolving needs of the developing countries. Now, when you talk about, we have been repeating these loss and damage needs time and again, and we hear that, well, this may not capture the scope, but let me just give you a little context here. Nepal, I come from a mountainous country, and then we have lots of our glaciers are retreating very fast. The latest report just says that 21 glacier lakes in the Himalayas are in the verge of outbursting. That's just in Nepal. Thanks to the Dutch government and the LDCF that helped lower out 2 lakes by 3 meters, reducing the risk. Still, more lakes are coming up. So just imagine 1 lake outbursting that is washing away our infrastructure, losing lives and property, agricultural land, and so on. So that's why, of course, other countries have other needs. But for us, this clearly is a very big need, and this needs to be reflected in the NCQC. Quality, we have again said time and again, the access is a very key element. We like to see the channels, access modality, speed, time sensitivity, etc. needs to be taken into consideration. The debt sustainability part, of course, also the grant for adaptation and loss and damage. Finally, co-chairs, I really want to stress the special circumstances of the LDCs that must be taken into consideration. Hence, the full operationalization of Article 9.4 and 9.9 of the Paris Agreement is essential and should take into consideration the capacity constrained groups of countries, in particularly the LDCs and SIDS. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nepal. Next, I have Group Sir, followed by Brazil, followed by India.
Thank you, Chair. In the interest of time, I will do my statement for both Brazil and Group Sul. Just joking. My group fully aligns itself with the statement made by Argentina on behalf of the G77. I'll try to be brief, but let me begin my intervention by stating the obvious, that the NCQG debate should reflect both the urgency of the current situation and the need for ambition in our collective action in this critical decade. And for us, the best way to do so is basing our debates on the agreed language of both the UNFCCC and its Paris Agreement. We need to look on those two legal instruments and see which parts of it are lacking implementation and focus the finance to deliver the means for the implementation. Chairs, we thank you for the work done on the document, but we do agree that we need to streamline the text. And we will do so by keeping consistency with the mandate and with the legal framework of the Convention and its Paris Agreement. With regard to the statement of facts, we do consider that we can clean the text of statement of facts, but we would use some of those statements on the preamble, especially those that reflect the best science available of the IPCC. We agree with the idea of eliminating repetition, eliminating duplication in the text, but also avoiding duplication of work with other processes, such as the Sharm el-Sheikh dialogue on 21C. Still with regard to the streamlining of the text, we do respectfully disagree with our colleague from, I think it was Norway, on this idea of removing old positions, old ideas. Some of those old ideas, they are old because they are coherent with the Paris Agreement and the Convention. So we should base our evaluation not on the age of the ideas, but on their value. We are eager to engage in substantive discussions on new iterations of the text, but we want to see real progresses on topics such as concrete options for the quantum, a clear definition of climate finance that is based on concessionality of resources and climate specificity. We want to see clarity on the burden share of developed countries, balance between mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage, just transitions, the recognition of special needs of seeds and LDCs. We also would like to see the same level of attention to the qualitative elements in the text. We consider that this part of the decision is the one that will really make a difference in the reality of our populations and in our ability to deliver climate action. We want to see elements including on access, climate specificity, and debt sustainability. On transparency arrangements, we consider that they must reflect the need for accountability on commitments made by developed countries and on the tracking of the implementation of the goal. Let me finish by just restating that we trust in the work of the co-chairs in guiding us through this process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Group Sir. Colleagues, we need to leave by 5 p.m. This room is booked for another meeting. I still have 8 speakers on the list, and we won't have enough time to get through all of those speakers. We can book another room for tomorrow to hear the rest of the speakers list. This would just mean that we can't, it will just delay getting a revised document to you. If the remaining speakers can be really quick and focus on guidance to how you want us to take forward this document, rather than, again, restating your preferred options and the rationales behind them, we can maybe quickly get through the list and we can get started on the work right away. Otherwise, we will need to delay this by 24 hours. So it's we're in your hands here. Did you want to come back in Brazil's national? Okay, thank you very much. Next, I have India, followed by the EU and Iraq. So India.
Thank you, Co-Chair, and India is speaking on behalf of LMDCs. We thank you for collating the views and submissions of various stakeholders. We support the statements made by G77, ASEAN, China, Arab Group, LDCs, Brazil, and colleagues from other developing countries. We request you to streamline the document by A, removing the redundancies and repetitions, B, separating out facts and statements as a separate annexure or section, and recognizing that there are aspects that are clearly outside the mandate of the agreement and previous decisions. Some of these which we have highlighted so far are NCQG, being outcome-based, a multi-layer investment goal, a separate section on policy prescriptions, references to the expansion of the contributor base, differentiation among the beneficiaries, and references to Article 21C. There are few new ones based on our reading of the current document: language on risks, insurance, reforming international financial architecture, and calls on bodies outside the UNFCCC, such as credit rating agencies. The reason is that we are here to discuss how much the developed countries are going to provide in terms of financial support to developing countries. Thank you, and back to you, Co-Chair.
Thank you very much, India, on behalf of LMDC. Next, I have EU, followed by Iraq, followed by Japan.
Thank you very much. I have the honour of speaking on behalf of the European Union. So I'll be brief and great if you can really get started on the streamlining. We greatly appreciate your work. We gave you a strong mandate in Dubai. We want you to also use that mandate that you have. We want you to do technical streamlining and indeed avoid repetition where it can be avoided. I'm not going to, we have full confidence in you knowing how to take that forward. We appreciate the input paper, but we just can't work with it in its current state. So indeed, quite sort of technical streamlining, keeping the nuance, but at least sort of removing the repetition. But just wanted to react very quickly to some of the views that have been expressed here. In our view, we absolutely need to keep the quantitative and qualitative elements together. And also, I respectfully disagree with the views expressed where streamlining is interpreted as removing elements that we regard as very essential to the mandate at hand on the work of the NCQG. I'll touch on just two of them very quickly. The first one is on the contributor base. In our view, it is crystal clear that the contributor base is on the table in the NCQG discussions. In fact, it's never left the table. It just like the needs and priorities are evolving and are dynamic in nature, the same is true for the responsibility, the economic capabilities, and the ability to contribute. Development is a dynamic concept. It's not static. The second relates to the Paris alignment of finance flows, Article 21C. It flows directly from the mandate of the NCQG in at least two different ways. First of all, the NCQG aims at contributing to accelerate the achievement of the Article 2 as a whole, including Article 21C, that's from Glasgow. And secondly, the decision 14 CMA1 sets Article 21C as a determinant of a strengthened response to climate change, sustainable development and efforts to eradicate poverty. Similarly, on recipient base, I'm not going to get in detail to that, but we do believe that it's very useful to consider how best to support the most vulnerable countries and those with the greatest need. Good luck with the work with the streamlining.
Thank you very much, EU. Next, I have Iraq, followed by Switzerland.
Thank you, Co-Chair. I will be in brief. Also, thank you for your constructive efforts on managing this process. Iraq aligns with the statement delivered by Argentina representative on behalf of G77 and China, and Saudi Arabia representative on behalf of the Arab group. I think it should be a framework for a new collective quantified goal, including principles and provisions of UNFCCC and its Paris Agreement. Second, the scope and mandate of NCQG and don't be outside of them. Marriage duplicate. On mandate, there are elements should be core and main elements like quantum, time frame, access, feature, etc. There are elements need more clarification. There are elements don't consist with the principles and provisions of UNFCCC and Paris Agreement. On principles, NCQG must not impose additional conditionalities to the provision and or mobilization of climate finance to developing countries. NCQGs recognize the importance of promote sustainable development and eradication of poverty for developing countries. On ambition, it should be taken into account in a way that consists with the extreme challenges facing by developing countries. On equality, our two highest priority for equality is the grant-based support and the alignment of support with national plans. On transparency, the transparency arrangement must incorporate the climate finance definition. On access features, we called on the need for streamlined, efficient, and swift access to resources for all developing countries across all channels. On enablers, and CQG must address these enablers of climate finance, such as the high cost of capital, high transactions cost associated with access, etc. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Iraq. Switzerland.
Thank you, Co-Chair. I'll be very brief so we make it to the end of the session. You got tons of suggestions on streamlining already. Align with many of those, just to highlight what we disagree with in terms of streamlining. So many suggestions, great, but what we disagree with is removing options and ideas from the table. We have to maintain the nuances. We strongly disagree with the notion that elements such as the contributor base, references to Article 2.1c or specifications of the recipient base are outside the mandate. We also want to maintain qualitative elements that specify the quantum together. With regards to the inclusion of new elements, fine if you don't include those, but mainstream them across the structure as it is. We wouldn't feel comfortable with having one distinct options freestanding aside what's in the text, since we have all put forward our own kind of distinct options and they're now across the text mainstream. So we wouldn't, and we feel we have to engage with each other's different elements. That's why we feel that's more helpful. We disagree with the clustering suggested by Saudi Arabia, but we are fine with their suggestion for, I think it was their cluster 4 of referencing to old meetings and stuff to delete text that refer to that. And with that, good luck with the streamlining. We're looking forward to engage with a shorter text. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gabby, on behalf of EIG, Switzerland only. Okay, thanks. Thank you very much, Gabby. We have to close at this session. We have still outstanding speakers on the list. We have Japan, Barbados, Panama, China, and Morocco, and I think Pakistan as well. We sit with a situation that we have a speakers list outstanding. Technically, we would want to have everybody, hear everybody before we make a suggestion and a way forward. There's 2 proposals that we would want to make to you. One is, one proposal which we're suggesting is that if you will allow us to be able to update the document, that we can start doing that. We have also spoke to the Secretariat. We will be able to get a room tomorrow between 3 to 5 so that we can give the opportunity to everybody else to provide their views. Or the other option is that we will wait till after tomorrow. If you feel not comfortable giving us that mandate that we take all your views, and then after we've heard all your views, seek a mandate from you to update the document. So those are the 2 options that are available. But rest assured, everybody that has raised the flag, your views will be heard tomorrow. I think in the interest of trying to move forward, Fiona and I are seeking your mandate to start updating based on the guidance that you've already provided here, unless there's somebody that, or any party that feels that it is too early for us to do that. So can I just get a sense, are you comfortable with us starting the updating process based on the guidance that we've heard from the majority of the parties here, and that we will then arrange a room for tomorrow between 3 to 5. The Secretary will provide the details of that, and all those remaining speakers on the list, or those who want to intervene, will have the opportunity to intervene. Are there any objections to that kind of approach? Pakistan?
Well, thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. I think I'll, as you suggested, I'll make my intervention at whatever time you want to give us. But one thing we need to have a clarification is when you say that you're going to streamline the document. I would just like to request you if you can give us as to what your modus operandi will be in streamlining that, so that we may be very clear as to how you'll do the process. Thank you.
Sure, I can do that for you, colleagues. Just to give you just what we've heard from reflections from the interventions. People all have asked us to update the document. People have all asked us that the paper needs to be manageable. You've also said that there's a sense of importance and urgency for us to move forward and work rapidly. There's also a sense of urgency for us to also get to a point where we can engage on the substance. But to get to the point where we can engage on the substance, we do need a manageable document. What we've heard also is that there is numerous duplications and redundancies in the document, and that there is also a flow in the document that needs to be made more organized so that it's much more comprehensible. What we intend to do is focus on those duplications and redundancies, try and fix that, try and reorganize the document so there's a proper flow, and then bring that back to you. We don't intend to remove any ideas. There was also some concerns raised about removing old ideas and evolving ideas. We don't intend to do that, but we do intend to try and address all the duplications and redundancies, etc., so that we can give you a much more manageable document as you've asked us to do. And that is the approach that we will follow. And then we will create a space tomorrow to get all the other interventions in that. With that, are people comfortable? Can we proceed on that basis? Okay. Thank you very much. And then just check the notifications. We will arrange a venue for tomorrow. Thank you very much. And thanks for your constructive engagement.